Hello people, this is me Ivan Rystuk, and this is another episode of my YouTube channel where I'll be talking about policies that Ukraine needs to become a richer economy and more developed democracy, where all our needs would be covered by how the politics and how the economy operate, so we would have fair rules where we can strive as a nation, as a number of people, individuals who are truly a holistic society, where the degree of social cohesion is high and we interact with each other in a way that makes all of us richer and happier. Several things need to be said here. Well, first thing is that most of Ukraine's policies in recent years, since 2014, were prescribed by the International Monetary Fund, a lending institution based in Washington, D.C. However, most of those policies were not properly reflecting the amount of monetary support. What I mean is that the IMF mostly required these major changes, legislation moves, while the amount of monetary help it was providing didn't scale up well to the complexity of changes that Ukraine had to undergo, which why these reforms and changes and legislation moves were not popular with the Ukrainian society, and were not supported by the majority of the population, which is why most of the IMF programs that Ukraine went through weren't properly finished and stalled after receiving first or second tranche, and we never could get out of this area of instability, where the IMF was saying that, well, Ukraine's not doing its share of reforms and changes, which is why it shouldn't be supported as well on the global capital markets, because Ukraine is such a risky country and a very corrupted country, and one shouldn't trust Ukraine and Kiev and its government. It's not that I'm a critic of the IMF. It's a good institution, and its lending programs could be very, very impactful, helping to change the country for the better. But in case of Ukraine, the IMF underappreciated the importance of Ukraine and its geopolitical role in Eastern Europe. The IMF never noticed the war it's been having with Russia, and since beginning of the invasion on February 24th, the IMF still hasn't provided any substantial amount of funds to support the Ukrainian public budget and to support the Ukrainian economy, which is surprising, because this is exactly the right time when Ukraine needs monetary support. Most of the Western financial assistance program come with strengths, where Ukraine has to spend those money that are provided by the country's Western partners to buy more weapons and to pay for these weapons, while the economy also needs an injection of cash that would keep our currency afloat and that would make it stronger than it is and would bring the inflation down. But IMF is not doing those moves by some reasons. IMF has this hands-off approach to war in Ukraine, which is something that should be changed, and I think this will be changed. I know the Treasury Department of the United States has its influence over the IMF policies, and I think the Treasury Department should intervene in how the IMF treats Ukraine and sees Ukraine and prioritizes Ukraine's problems, Ukraine's economic needs. The first thing that IMF was recommending is introducing the rule of law. The rule of law, which is a philosophy that was born in 18th century along the lines of German intellectual tradition. This rule of law programs mostly included creating and reforming the anti-corruption agencies. They have been created and they operate in Ukraine, doing their share of work to bring white-collar criminals to prison. But the problem is, like, the biggest corruption case that Ukraine's had since 1991, when the country got independent. This was case of Privatbank, a lending institution where its former owner Igor Kolomoisky likely stole up to $5 billion the finance ministry had to nationalize the bank in 2016 and inject capital at taxpayers' expense. Now it's the biggest bank of Ukrainian economy and of the Ukrainian banking industry, and it's state-owned. It's a good bank, and some say it will be privatized at some stage, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, since during the war Ukraine needs a big, stable, state-owned bank that would have trust of the customers and all the people in Ukraine that need a good and strong bank. So the National Anti-Corruption Bureau never did much to investigate how the $5 billion were stolen from the private bank on the eve of its nationalization. It's not that hard to investigate those types of crimes because they are big and they leave lots of traces and lots of ways to get better understanding where money went. The private bank was such an important and systemic banking institution that the regulators were following it very closely. So if the Anti-Corruption Bureau would do a fair amount of efforts to investigate where the stolen money went and do efforts to get this money back to the Ukrainian budget, as it needs those money now during the war to buy more weapons and to support the budget and to support the economy and the citizens of Ukraine, it hasn't been doing much. Recently, I asked both the National Bank of Ukraine, which is a banking regulator, and the Anti-Corruption Bureau to tell me what's being done to get the stolen $5 billion back. Well, the National Bank said in its response that they're able to cooperate with any of the agencies that would lead the investigation. The Anti-Corruption Bureau didn't even respond to my letter. They asked me, their press secretary wrote me, asked me, why do I need the information for? When I explained that I need for an article about private bank, she said okay, and never got back, never got me a response. What I was asking is what the National Anti-Corruption Bureau is doing right now to get $5 million back. They were stolen and Ukraine needs those money. I believe that the war is the right time to speed up the efforts to get the money back, especially now when Ukraine has all the support from the Western institution and the US Treasury Department, which oversees all the dollar transactions around the world, could help National Anti-Corruption Bureau to get the money back. And also it could get the SWIFT, the payment infrastructure company, to cooperate and get the money stolen from private bank back. But the National Anti-Corruption Bureau is not doing much, believing that it's impossible to get the money back. The investigation is still ongoing, but they're not even telling what's being done. I suppose not much is being done, because otherwise they would tell it responding to my letter. That's the rule of law part of Ukraine's policies. Now let's talk about the foreign investments. The IMF was always prescribing Ukraine to attract more foreign investments, and I do believe that attracting foreign investments into the Ukrainian economy is a good thing, since this is able to keep up the Ukrainian currency at a good rate, and also bring more stability to the markets here in Ukraine, and also provide jobs that Ukrainians need with the good salaries, where they would be able to buy things, afford mortgages, and pay for all kinds of stuff. But on the Ukrainian business scene, local companies are not welcoming the foreign investors. They're trying to push them away, so no one would come to the market and earn money and produce products and services. That was pretty much impossible for a big foreign company to come to business in Ukraine. Well, some managed to do this, but mostly they stayed away of Ukraine. Well, first the IMF was saying all the time that Ukraine is highly corrupt, and the second thing is that these foreign companies, when they started researching the Ukrainian market and its opportunities, they were facing the pressure from the local actors and local business players who have divided the market into their shares and don't want any newcomers here. Take Lidl, a German grocery chain, and well, it's like a supermarket which wanted to do business in Ukraine. Local retail companies didn't allow Lidl, this German company, to come to Ukraine and do business and create jobs and then build property and real estate That was the problem. The government, since 2014, has been paying lots of lip service to how important it is to bring foreign investors to the Ukrainian economy, but de facto, very little foreign investors actually came here. Some of them were still buying Ukrainian bonds. I mean, Ukrainian bonds for the high interest rates have been always popular with the foreign investors who have a good risk assessment policy. But in terms of real economy, not much has been built in Ukraine, not much has been produced in Ukraine. We need manufacturing jobs. So the country would be producing something, that you can touch with your hands. But the local business sectors weren't happy with any foreign newcomers coming here and doing business. And now the other thing, the national bank, which is the central bank and the banking and monetary regulator, the IMF has been prescribing lots of policies to the national bank in Kiev, mostly about keeping the currency at free float rate, and also the providing indicators for the fiscal deficit and the amount of taxes collected, all kind of macroeconomic indicators that the Ukrainian government had to follow and to use as guidelines. But mostly the National Bank of Ukraine has stayed as a lobbyist of the banking sector. The banking sector is indeed controlled by the state-owned institutions, but on the other hand, we still have big private banks and even some Russian capital in the banking industry, and the National Bank hasn't been paying lots of attention to how to stop being a lobbyist of the commercial banks and protect financial interests of Ukrainians like me, like myself. The National Bank should be a protector of people's money. We want good deposits, we want safe deposits and safe banks that we can take out money as loans at good interest rates. But the central bank has never got into this type of regulating where it would be on the side of consumers, not on the side of the banking industry. That's how all the central banks around the world operate. They do protect people's best interests. But here in Ukraine, the central bank is mostly a friend of the commercial industry, where it would provide the banks with liquidity that they need at good rates, and so give them money where they would be buying bonds and earning interest. I mean, that's not how the healthy banking industry operates in any of the healthy countries with a healthy economy. And then the currency. The IMF was always telling the NBU that it should provide a free float rate of local currency, Ukrainian currency. But the problem is that it was devaluating very substantial, and it's been devaluated now since beginning of the war, which got all of us poorer. Now we can't buy much with the Ukrainian currency because it's been devalued against the basket of other currencies like US dollar and the euro, and the Chinese renminbi and Japanese yen. The solution to Ukrainian currency crisis would be joining the euro area and introducing euro as a currency here in Ukraine. You don't have to be a member of the European Union to have euro as a currency. Take Montenegro. It's been enjoying the euro as a currency without joining the European Union. We need the same thing here in Ukraine, and moreover, Ukraine will join the European Union. It's on the path to join, and it's been admitted as a candidate member to this bloc, economic and trade and policy bloc. So Ukraine has many more reasons than Montenegro to introduce the euro, and the central bank hasn't ever said anything about that Ukraine would possibly join the euro area. When I was doing an interview with Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, not so long ago, I asked her whether Ukraine has chances to introduce the euro. Well, she said that the chances always are there, but this is a lengthy process, and Ukraine should be first properly prepared for this in terms of its economy and indicators, and second, Ukraine should be asking for this. This should be questioned not from a journalist during the interview. This should be questioned from the central bank governor or the prime minister. But it seems like not too many people here in Ukraine who are doing politics are interested in introducing euro as a currency for Ukraine to have financial stability and less inflation. Come on, we're having inflation that is over 20%, and it's going to be over 30% by the year end, according to official estimates and forecasts. We can't live sustainably with such an inflation. We're getting poorer daily. That's a horrible thing. You know, the inflation ruins what we have, and we don't have much. We've never had much. We've never had the good wages in Ukraine, good salaries. We could never afford the mortgages, and you know, buying an apartment or any kind of property was a huge headache for all of us. We couldn't afford anything. You know, I'm 39 and I still can't afford to buy a house or apartment or even to rent anything. I have to live with my parents for the reason that my earnings wouldn't allow me to live separately. And I'm 39. I'm not like the extremely young person who's like 18 or 19. In the developed economies, people are able to, you know, to get an apartment, whether they buy it or rent it, at much younger age. This is the direct reason of the policies that Ukraine was doing, and some of them were prescribed by the development banks, and international lending institutions, and some policies prescribed by the organizations like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. All those are very good organizations and supportive and helpful, but Ukraine could never, you know, be a beneficiary of those progress. Most of the time, the scale of changes that were required was like really painful for us. And secondly, it wasn't ever popular and wasn't scaled up well to the, you know, amount of monetary support that Ukraine was getting. It was like change the country at a degree of 100% and then get 1% in monetary support. That doesn't work this way. I mean, for people in Ukraine to support all these development programs and development policies, they need to see that those programs make us richer, not poorer. You can't have a reform policy that makes people poorer overnight. Though even the macroeconomic theory of classical liberalism tells you to do these reforms. I mean, we don't need the theory of how Ukraine should look. We need practice. We need better and richer Ukraine that would allow people like me to get mortgages and buy the apartments. So I told you three things about three policies that Ukraine was prescribed and never got successful with it, which is the rule of law policies, the foreign investment policies, and the central bank policies. Hopefully this will change after the war and we'll have a better, richer, and healthier Ukraine. Glory to our country, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.